not everybody is equipped to or interested in engaging in high-level discussion of abstract and creative ideas. You know, you hear this idea that everyone's creative. That's a lie. It's as straightforward as that. True creativity is very, very rare. And so, and if you happen to be a creative person, or if you happen to be someone who's profoundly interested in ideas, you are in a pronounced minority. Just as you are if you happen to be extremely extroverted, or extremely agreeable, or extremely conscientious. These are minority issues. And what you do is you find like-minded people who are capable of engaging that. You know, heavyweight weightlifters compete with heavyweight weightlifters for a reason, and everyone thinks that's fine. And the same thing applies to intellectual and creative endeavors. So what you do is you try to find a community where that's the nature of the community, and you likely have to find a relationship like that as well. You know, so I don't think so. I think what contributes to the siloing is the arrogance that goes along with it. Because if you can be interested in ideas and you can be creative, well, that's the arrogance of the intellect, right? That's the thing the Catholic Church had warned about for centuries, is the arrogance of the intellect. So because if you're wise as well as smart, and there is no relationship between being smart and being wise, they are not the same thing. There's no quick pathway from smart to wise. And many of the people who I've known who were very wise well, some of them were intellectually impaired and were still wise, you know. So it's the arrogance that brings up the block. And I see this, for example, happening in the United States in particular, because the last time I went down there, for example, I had friends down there, and some of those friends are very, very smart people, and some of them were talking about the Trump voters, and they were talking about the Trump voters with contempt. And I thought, you better watch that, because that's 50% of the damn population. And it might be convenient to think that they're stupid and beneath you, but it's not conducive to a civil state, and there's no evidence that it's true, because there isn't a straight line between intelligent and wise. And so I think that if your character is developed and you're intelligent, you can have your siloed creative community, but you develop enough wisdom so that you can see all the things that people can do that are of high ethical utility, that are outside the intellectual domain. You know, and I think that's why in the New Testament, I think that's why Christ is a carpenter. Right? Because, well, first of all, carpenter is one of those jobs that when you're dishonest, it manifests itself immediately, because what you build falls down. And so if you're an honest carpenter, you build a good house. So there's a nice metaphor there. But it's also a warning, in some sense, against the equation of intellectual brilliance with moral superiority. And so if the intellects would drop their moral superiority, and fat chance there is of that, then that divide between the working class, say, and the elite would resolve. And there's every reason to have respect for decent working class people. I mean, it's on their labor, as the left-wingers at least hypothetically agree, that the entire edifice of the culture is resting. So you can have your cake and eat it too, but you have to not assume that your niche makes you superior. And it's very difficult for smart people, especially smart. There's this scene in Nietzsche's Since Thus Spake Zarathustra, where Zarathustra, the prophet, comes down from the mountain, and he comes into a public square, and there's this crowd around this little midget who's only about this high, who has a gigantic ear, and everyone is marveling at him. Well, that's what the modern intellect is like. It's a midget with a giant, well, mouth, generally, not an ear. And the being is underdeveloped, but the intellect is hyper activated. And it makes the person extraordinarily unbalanced. And it's partly because they can't compete outside the intellectual realm. And that makes them very bitter, because they tend to think, well, God, I'm so smart, everything should just come to me. It's like, sorry, that's not how the world works. And it also, that attitude is immediately evident to people that they're talking to when they talk in the manner that they talk, if they are arrogant intellectuals of that sort. You see that in The Simpsons did a good job of that with Comic Book Guy, right? I mean, he was completely useless in every possible dimension with an IQ of about 160. And it's very annoying to people who have an IQ of 160 that they can also be completely useless. but it happens a lot. So, yeah.
WN.
Wait, you're listening.
Okay.
Okay.
You're
Listening
to RadioLab.
RadioLab.
From
WNYC.
See?
Yep.
I'm Robert Krulwich.
I'm Molly Webster.
This is RadioLab, and
Today we've got a guy asking a pretty common question.
but the way he tries to solve this question is at first a thrill to him, then a crutch, then a curse, and then it ends up in an extraordinarily deep puzzle.
It comes to us from producer Andy Mills.
Story is about David Weinberg, a buddy of mine, and it starts off right around the time he gets out of high school.
Yeah, I graduated from high school in 2000 and then went directly to university, and then I got kicked out somewhere at the beginning of the second semester, and then left that town that I was living in and moved to the town where all my friends were going to college. And
He moves into like a group house,
it was a party house.
him and a bunch of his friends.
There was a giant cross in the front yard that my friends had found while tripping on acid and put in a shopping cart, and they put in the front yard.
Our fact checker actually found out that they were tripping on mushrooms, not acid, but anyway.
A lot of drinking, a lot of partying.
And for David, like for a while, it was good.
I'm hanging out with like the people that I care about most in the world. I feel incredibly free because I don't live at home anymore. And then it just started to get old.
For one, every day when his friends would go off to class, David would have to go to work.
Yeah, during the day I was working as a janitor at the university where my friends went, and during the evenings I would deliver pizzas.
And it went on like this for years. You know, day after day they would party, but then in the morning when his friends would go to class, he would go and clean toilets and then deliver pizzas. All through sophomore year, they would go to class, he would clean toilets and then deliver pizzas. Junior year, class, toilets, pizzas.
And like, I think, looking back on it now, I think there was this rage that started to build up inside me because, I mean, I was really sick of cleaning the toilets of kids in the dorms who I resent, but I also recognize are able to do something that I wasn't able to do. And, you know, all my friends were at that university and they were about to graduate. And so I think I was also worried that, like, well, they're all going to go off and live these lives and I'm going to be stuck here cleaning toilets.
And on top of that, by the time most of David's friends were seniors, he was spending his weekends in jail for driving on a suspended license.
So my life at that point was like cleaning toilets in the morning, delivering pizzas in the evening, and then every weekend I was in jail. And there was kind of this breaking point. Like one thing that we did a lot of, like we listened to a lot of punk music. My friends were in punk bands, and we would just like get really drunk and like yell into the speakers, probably like 3 or 4 nights a week, you know. And one night we were doing that. It was me, my friend Danny, and my friend Mark, and something just snapped inside me. I just kind of lost it. Just started like grabbing chairs and hurling them through windows and just like smashed out all the windows in our house. You couldn't see the floor because there was just like wreckage everywhere, and I was all bloody, and it was just like, it was intense. I don't think it hit me until the next morning when I saw what it looked like. Like a hurricane had like ripped through the house.
Yeah. And all of his friends,
Everyone was just sort of stunned.
they were sort of like, what's going on?
And then, you know, when you confront a reality like that, everything just sort of gets stripped away and you're just left with this question that's like, who am I, like, and what am I doing with my life?
And around that time, David was driving around delivering pizzas, listening to the radio, and
WBZ Chicago, it's This American Life. I'm Ira Glass.
heard this story.
This Scott Carrier story called The Test.
I was hired to interview men and women in the state of Utah who receive Medicaid support for treatment of mental illnesses, generally.
And it just like stopped me in my tracks.
All right, so the story's by a guy named Scott Carrier. He's a frequent contributor at This American Life, and it's basically about how he gets this new job.
He gets this job driving around the state of Utah, interviewing schizophrenic people, giving them this test.
I took the job because I had no other. I took the job because I just quit my steady job, my professional job.
And this is happening at a point where Scott's life is falling apart.
What I wanted more than anything was to put my boss on the floor and stand on his throat and watch him
He
gag.
talks about how he hates his boss.
Then my wife moved out, took the kids and everything.
His wife had just left him.
So I took the job and did the job, and my life will never be the same.
And David says, as soon as he heard that story,
I remember thinking, like, I need to figure out how to become a radio producer. That's what I need to do.
Why?
Why does he want to become a radio producer?
well, I think first off, Scott Carrier is really good at what he does.
Yes.
There's something about him that is magnetic, right? It gets people thinking, I want to do that. But maybe more importantly, in the story, Scott is stuck, not too dissimilar from where David finds himself. And like what Scott does is he turns his stuckness into a story. And in doing so, kind of gives it meaning.
So he says, yeah, it's rising above your situation, sort of. Is that what you mean? Yeah.
And when David hears it, he thinks like, well, maybe I can do that too.
Nice.
Makes sense.
Yeah. It was like, okay, this is my ticket.
So that summer, he lined up a job at this camp.
This summer camp in upstate New York. And I bought this mini disc recorder.
Got himself a mic.
A little mic that you could clip onto your shirt.
And
Posting recording inside the tent.
he and his buddy Mark, who had just graduated, they left Colorado and headed to upstate New York.
My idea was like, okay, I'll just go around and get all these recordings and then I'll write these stories about what it all means. And
Day one.
it's sort of like on the road, but with recordings.
He recorded the kids at the camp. This bar fight one night when he was out with the other counselors.
What's going on over there? Is there a keyboard or something?
Yeah, we brought the keyboard.
He and Mark flirting with girls.
What do you got these on for, buddy?
Listen, this is the coolest thing in the world. Put these on.
Alright.
Isn't that cool? It's a live recording of what's happening right now.
Right now?
Yeah.
I distinctly remember just being in complete awe of hearing recordings that I had made, where nothing was happening. The idea that I could make a recording and listen to it, it was like
early man sees a mirror, and just can't stop staring at it.
Yeah.
He actually wasn't interviewing people or anything like that. He sort of decided that he wanted to record moments as they happened, like to him. And he figured the best way to do that was to record secretly.
I had cut a small hole in all of the pants and shorts that I had in the pocket. So like I'd get up in the morning, put the mini disc recorder in my pocket, and then I'd run the cord down my shirt, and anytime something interesting was happening, I would slip my finger in my pocket and just press the record button.
At first, just some moments here and there.
It's really scary.
These possible little scenes for a story, maybe.
Abraham.
Then
Well, we gotta get to Queens. We gotta get on the 7th train.
he and his buddy Mark go to New York City. And now everything sounds interesting.
The system must be overthrown!
So he's recording more and more.
On the upper, middle, east.
So funny!
Then every day. After New York, he and Mark hitchhiked across Europe together.
Europe? My name's Mark.
And I'm David.
And at this point, David is recording people that pick him up. He and Mark and their other buddy Dom on the side of the road.
When the rhythm of the cars on the highway is even, it sounds almost like waves, like on the ocean.
Every street performer I would run up to, stand next to and record.
Just everything. And you're still thinking to yourself, like, man, I am just getting gold.
Yeah, I was like, this is the raw material for my first great story, and I think I tried, like, I separated myself from, it's kind of cliche, like, oh yeah, you graduate from college and you backpack around Europe, and it's like, no, I'm not one of those people. Like, I'm actually making a grand documentary. Like, I'm a somebody, I'm not just like everybody else.
Yeah. Meanwhile, David is accumulating hundreds and hundreds of hours of tape, and one thing that you'll hear if you manage to listen through all of it, or most of it, as I did, is just him hanging out with his buddy Mark.
He was one of those people, like, we became instant friends the moment we met.
Mark was a year older than David. He was really into music, sound engineering.
That's Mark singing. We had this like perfect dynamic where Mark had like enough talent, like he could actually play music and like riff these funny songs on the spot. And I sort of like brought the raw enthusiasm to it.
And the two of them together,
we would just end up in these crazy places.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember this recording?
Yeah, I remember that. We were in Croatia, and then we ended up at this huge, amazing party. It was like in this old, abandoned, cavernous building, which is hundreds of beautiful Croatian people. That was such a great day.
But then
Do you want french fries, veggies, or applesauce?
David and Mark came back to the States. Mark went out to Seattle to record an album with his band, and David...
I got a job waiting tables at an Applebee's.
You guys want any dinner salads or soup before the meal?
back in his hometown, living in his parents' basement.
And if you guys aren't taking 2 seconds to try to upsell, you're taking money out of your pocket. If you're taking money out of your pocket, you're taking money out of mine.
This kid that I hung out with the most, that I worked with, was this meth addict. I would go over to his place after work and like drink beer and play video games, and he would get high, and it was just like really depressing. It was a hard time. It was shitty.
And David has all of this tape, like tons and tons and tons of tape from times with Mark in New York, in Europe, but he has no idea what to do with it. So he just keeps hitting record.
Yes.
Sign up for the night shift.
Yeah, I mean, I just needed that more. I think I needed the recording and the wire more than any time in my life than what the, like that was the period when I needed the wire the most, because it was like
raspberry lemonade, sure. Sure.
This sucks, but like I'm gonna get through this. And this will be a chapter in the story.
I spent a lot of my time with my finger gently resting on the mini disc player. I could feel the disc spinning when it was recording. It was just very satisfying and comforting, you know?
Like a pulse, in a way.
Yeah, yeah.
It's still going.
Yeah.
Excuse me? Excuse me? You know what we should get? One of those bells. Put it right here. So tight, dude.
Actually, that would be good. Ding, 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 ding.
Or like if they just made this printer make it beep, you know, like ding.
If it made it.
And then it just kept getting louder and louder until you made it change.
Hey, I'm not bad about making drinks. I always make drinks.
No, not at all. You're good. Some bartenders.
I get drinks. I put drinks for everything. Well, I'm saying.
Does he have a story? I'm not so sure he's got one to tell.
Well, hang on.
Okay.
And after the break, I think you'll hear an answer.
Okay.
RadioLab are using IBM Watson/Smart.
The people at the center of this.
I'm Robert Krulwich.
I'm Molly Webster.
And we're back.
And today we're in the middle of a story about David Weinberg, who is recording almost every day of his life. And last we left him, he was in Applebee's, working as a waiter and living in his parents' basement.
Right. But he did eventually save up enough money to travel again, went to Alaska, things like that. And he says that, well, when times were bad, like at Applebee's, he needed these recordings to make his life feel like it had meaning. When times were good, he couldn't stop recording because he was worried that he was going to miss something.
Yeah, occasionally like something would go wrong. Like I lost 3 or 4 recorders. They broke down over the course of the years that I was recording. And whenever a recorder broke, there would be a period where I'd have to wait for the new recorder to come. And I just felt like on edge all the time, you know, like I'm missing out, you know, and like in this weird twisted way, like I felt like I was missing out on life because I wasn't recording it.
So when you would get the recorder, it would be like a relief?
Oh yeah, I was like, oh thank God I can, you know, like this pressure would be released and I could go back to recording. And I would just feel like myself again, you know.
But then...
Hey, is Brian ahead of you or behind you?
David ended up down in Seattle where he met back up with Mark.
Yeah, and Mark and I got in some big arguments in Seattle before I left.
Something that you said that was private, like publicize it? What is it? Well, let's analyze why it is that you feel uncomfortable.
He just told me one night at the bar, he's like, I hate the fact that you record me all the time. And, you know, I was recording that conversation too.
I don't want to get to the heart of this. Why?
It's okay, well, it's okay.
And he just laid it all out for me, you know, like he was someone who spent his day, all day, in a recording studio, meticulously laying down perfect tracks. You know, that was his life. And so to him, this idea that you would just sort of like record everything, it was wrong for a lot of reasons. One of which was just, he just didn't think that experiences warranted that.
And then he had like philosophical objections to it.
Just due to the fact that when I live my life, I live it like, it's fleeting. It's a fleeting, everything is all temporary.
That like what makes life great and worth living is that it is this fleeting thing and it's temporary. And
No, I like my life being temporal. I don't want it posterity is only good in like certain doses. Oh, hey, beer too. All right.
and when you are trying to constantly record it and capture it, you're just taking away from that aspect of life.
It's like, don't keep trying to capture like the essence of this thing. Just be in the essence of the thing.
Right. So here you've got David like saying that, you know, he's recording all the time as to not miss anything. And Mark is saying that no, by recording all the time, you are missing everything.
Yeah.
You're missing the important things.
And it got to the point where he said he didn't want to be recorded anymore. And it was like really getting in the way of our friendship, because it was like, it like puts a ceiling on where your relationship can go when someone feels like they can't open up to you in that way. It just puts this wedge between you in a way that's just like awful.
Did you stop recording at this point? Or
Well, I couldn't stop. Like at that point, I just like, I don't know, whether it's OCD or whatever it was, like I was just like, I couldn't stop recording. And so I was always recording. And the recording was like, almost like a uniform for this person that I wanted to be. It was like, it's like you're in a play and you think you're living this life, and then when the disc stops, suddenly like the lights go up and you realize it's all fake. Just like, face it, dude, like you're just drifting.
At this point, David has around 2,000 hours of tape. Because he keeps on recording, he's not really hanging out with Mark anymore, and he ends up just drifting down to New Orleans. This is not very long after Hurricane Katrina.
And it's like, everyone had a story about the flood, and it was like, so I would like listen to these people's like harrowing journeys, and then like all these injustices that they'd faced.
So he decided to do something that he never really done before, and started interviewing people.
Yeah, I've been there since the storm, but I've been living in New Orleans East.
Telling their stories.
How has it changed since?
I've changed not much since Katrina.
With their permission, not recording them secretly.
This story opening up,
So where did you do your grocery shopping before?
I was doing it down in Gentilly.
And then he started getting those stories onto New Orleans public radio stations.
You're listening to WWOZ Street Talk, stories of New Orleans cultural rebuilding.
I'm telling you, man, I appreciate that discipline. Because I was growing up just terrible, man.
And then at night, he'd go home and he would listen to audio from The Wire.
Tape of like me in some bar, and
I think I offended everyone in that bar.
Yeah, you didn't make very many friends there.
like super drunk, and it's like,
I think I called them all assholes.
what? Like, why did I think this mattered? You know, like, why? You know? And then also this like dynamic started to change in my mind where like, it's one thing to record your own life. And yes, I mean, to be fair, I was also recording other people, but it was always framed around me, and everyone else was just sort of like supporting characters. But then when I started doing Stories in New Orleans, it was like, this is not about me. This is about other people. And like, suddenly it did start to feel dirty to record people. It was like all of that sort of came to a head, and I just felt worse and worse about recording. And then I just stopped. I was like, I don't want to do this anymore.
What about that feeling you were talking about just moments ago, where without the recorder recording what's happening, you felt as if you were missing out, that an experience was kind of wasted because you hadn't got a chance to record it?
I mean, that didn't go away. That definitely didn't go away. I mean, I feel like that still, to this day. I sometimes feel like, man, I wish I was recording this, you know? But it just forced me to really think hard about what moments in life were worth capturing and what weren't.
You know, so like if you do try to capture a moment, then you're kind of out of that moment. But if you don't, then poof, it's gone.
Well, it has the potential to be lost.
Right. I think that, yeah, we all can relate to this idea. But for David, the crux of that
tension
to do it or not to do it, like that became really difficult for him, in part because of what happened next. A few months after he had quit recording, he was talking to Mark, who is still back up in Seattle. He was very happy to hear that David wasn't recording anymore. And so Mark decided to go down to New Orleans and visit David and their buddy Danny, who was down there too.
And, man, this is hard because I haven't really told the real story about what happened with Mark. And I'm trying to think. I'll tell you the real story. And
just shoot.
So Danny and Mark and I were really close, the three of us. And one thing we would do a couple times a year, we would all go out to the mountains together and just have this great trip together, like as friends. And so we were going to do that in New Orleans. And so we got on our bikes and we rode down to the river and sat along the river for a while. And then we took the ferry over to the west bank, the other side of the river. You know, like New Orleans is like glittering across the water.
Got stoned.
And it was just magical. Like we were just sitting there for a long time, just talking, like having those sort of deep philosophical conversations.
David, for the first time in a long time, was not recording, wasn't worried about capturing the moment. So
my mind was free to not think about the recording, and then I was actually more present in some way,
And it just felt like it always did when we were close back in the mountains in Colorado. It was just like a great moment. And I wanted to keep hanging out there. And Mark was like getting kind of antsy. He wanted to go explore the city, He wanted to go exploring. And I was just like, didn't really feel like it. I was just sort of like, didn't want to be around other people. I was happy to be there with them. And then Mark just jumped up and took off, like just sprinted away. And we were like, whoa, that was weird, like it was very strange.
David says that Mark said something in that moment, but he can't remember exactly what.
And so we got on our bikes and we were only maybe 100 yards, 200 yards from the ferry that was parked there. And by the time we got to the bridge that connects the land to the ferry, I saw that Mark's bike was laying on its side on the ramp. I was just like, well, that's weird. In my mind, when I think back about it, I feel like things happen very slowly. Why is Mark's bike laying down? Why are all those people shouting? They're looking into the river. Why are they looking in the river? And then I look into the river and there's Mark. And he's swimming in the Mississippi and he's shouting something and I can't figure out what he's saying. And I was just like, holy shit, this is really bad. And then I got really, really scared. And I looked at Danny and Danny looked totally terrified. And he started to, he was going downriver, obviously it's the river. And so there was a point I could see off in the distance there was a boat, like a rescue boat or something had gotten into the water, and Mark started to drift around the bend, and he disappeared out of view.
David and Danny, they kind of walk up and down the river looking for Mark. They couldn't find him. Then it gets dark, and Danny and Mark, they just head home and wait for news there. The next morning, still no news. A few days later, the authorities, they gave up their official search for Mark and assumed that he was dead. And a week or so later, they found his body.
He had drowned.
And I should just add that there is no reason to suspect that this was a suicide.
Yeah.
I'm sorry that Mark passed, man. That's a tough story to hear.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Thinking about this through the lens of like you being someone who has a compulsion and obsession that is now under control but still lives in you, is there a part of you that wishes that you had been recording that day?
I don't know.
The thing is, David says, not long after Mark had died, he started going through a lot of his old recordings, and sometimes he would hear on them these great moments between the two of them. But a lot of times he says that almost like he could hear that ceiling that those recordings had put on his friendship with Mark.
Man, I want to fucking take a boat down the coast, man.
Yeah,
so bad.
I was acting different than I would have if I hadn't been recording. Like I was conscious that I was on tape all the time.
Even if the boat, kind of...
Demian was saying he was willing to, like...
And I also hear myself in these recordings often, like, stepping over him. Like, he'll say something, and then I'll jump in and just, like, clearly I'm just, like, I'm on my own, like, train of thought, and I'm not really listening to him, and that bothers me a lot. I'm glad I don't have... I think I'm glad that I don't know. It's just so hard, because on one hand, I'm very glad that I don't have to live with that tape and that it doesn't exist.
But at the same time, David says,
I feel like maybe I missed something, and maybe there's some part of what happened that night that I missed. All I know is that he just said, let's get out of here, and like jumped up, and like, I don't even remember exactly how he put it. I just remember all of a sudden he was gone. If I had that recording, maybe I could make sense of it, and maybe something would be more clear about it. I think about that a lot, but then I also think of what would Mark have wanted, and what that probably trumps whatever clarity. I don't know. Yeah, but I still think about it a lot. I still think about what I would get from those recordings if I had them.
And yeah, and I don't.
I should add here a little...
For opening up his audio archive and sharing it all with us and sharing the story.
And thank you, Andy Mills, who produced the whole thing.
And listen to all of those hours of tape.
Poor Andy.
I should add here a little update on David. He's actually a producer at KCRW. He's got this series that you should all check out called Below the 10.
Ooh.
And if you want to know more about that, or maybe listen to a lot...
Below the 10 what?
It's a series about people, like very one-of-a-kind, interesting people who live in L.A. It's called Below the 10. If you want to hear it, find links to it, or hear little snippets from the archive, you can find all that on our website. That's a thing you could do. I don't know if that's the thing we should say.
Which is radiolab.org.
That's it. Still it.
Start of message.
RadioLab.
Okay. It is December 25, 2018. Is this the writer's mind illness? To be so preoccupied with imaginary concepts and worlds that it stops your mind from presence in the amount others want. To be unreachable because of your escapism. To be seen scribbling or typing, asking others to wait while you capture something that's going to be irretrievable later if not recorded now. I can't tell. I am seeing the reenactments of a younger me and feeling a total personification that is finally as physical and perceivable to me as the worlds and settings of my deepest heart. How do people progress so far down a path of friendship unification that they've been able to invent elaborate headcanons that apply to themselves as a unit? Now this one is about what happens when you kind of get rid of the use of force and instead have your caretakers at the very top of your social order, kind of instructing everyone else on what needs to happen. It's from Robert Sapolsky, who studied a variety of different animal populations following this question thread, and it's an integral piece of the harm reduction element of my channel. Looks like I have to
WNYC is teaming up with
Who are you? Who is Moo?
Okay, you ready?
Yep.
All right, let's open the show today
Test, test, test.
on a sunny street corner
Okay.
in New Jersey.
So where are we now?
We are on Washington Street, which is the main thoroughfare in Hoboken.
It's a nice day in Hoboken. People are out and about after work.
Is that sangria? What do you guys drinking here?
And we're here with a guy. His name's John Horgan.
I'm a science journalist.
He's also a teacher.
Ooh, it is hot.
And John is out today with our producer, Lulu Miller, doing what he often does,
Hey, here comes someone.
which is to go up to someone he doesn't know.
Excuse me, sir. We're doing a survey. It'll only take a minute at most.
A minute I can give you.
And he asks them this one question.
Here's the question. Will humans ever stop fighting wars once and for all?
No, because of greed and one-upsmanship.
To explain, John has been asking this question: will humans ever stop fighting wars? For years. Because for him, this question, it's not just about war. It gets at something really basic. Do we feel we can change who we are? In any case, the first time it popped out of his mouth, it was 2003, and a friend had asked him to give a talk at a church just a few days after the first invasion of Iraq.
And so here I was in this church, and I can remember the mood was very somber. I was determined to try to make people feel that, okay, this is a setback, but still, you've got to believe that peace is possible, and I tried to list all the reasons.
And as he was making his case and getting worked up, he looked at the 60 or so people who were there in the audience. He said, all right, how many of you here believe that war will end someday?
And I think one or two people raised their hands.
Out of 60. And John thought, wait, is this really who we are?
And so that's actually when I started reading as much as I can about all these things and dug up some surveys from the 1980s.
What he found was that about 20 years ago, people were asking this question.
Do you think war will ever end?
Taking surveys. Now, granted, they were not the most scientific of surveys, but what the results seemed to indicate is that we used to be optimistic. Back in the 80s.
Only 1 in 3 thought that war is inevitable.
Huh. So it was a minority.
Yeah.
Whereas today,
will humans ever stop fighting wars once and for all?
if you take that question to the streets of Hoboken as we did, you'll find
No.
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 about 9 out of 10 people say no.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think so.
No.
No.
Never.
No.
Never?
No.
Now, depressingly, the worst part is that when he asked them the next question, why do you think this? Invariably, he gets something like,
I think there's a human nature for greed and to always want more.
it's just
Human nature.
A lot of people are big dumb animals and they're just going to keep fighting over useless
It's
things.
in our genes. It's just the way people are.
And I don't think we're ever going to learn.
Why do you say that?
I just think that it's too ingrained in our human nature. So
So we want to challenge that last statement.
too ingrained in our human nature.
That one. Okay, we know some things have been handed down to us from our primate ancestors. Violence, maybe. Who knows? The question is, how ingrained is that stuff?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you think that we have inherited something, yeah, what can we do about it? Are we stuck or
Or can we change if we make the right choices?
Yeah.
So what we've got for you this hour are 3 stories
where choice, individual choice, challenges destiny.
Right.
Maybe.
We hope.
Yeah.
I'm Jad Abumrad.
I'm Robert Krulwich.
This is RadioLab. Stick around. To get things started, let's just take the question that was just in the air. Are we, human beings, violent forever and forever and forever? Amen. Is that just who we are?
That's a good question.
It's a good question, right? And the people who usually say yes, say yes because, in part, because of our ancestors.
We're like them, they're like us. That's how it goes.
On the other hand, let me tell you a story.
I was hoping there would be another hand.
Yes. Do you remember this guy?
Robert Sapolsky.
Oh, yeah. That's Robert Sapolsky.
We've had him on the show a couple times. He's a neuroscientist, spends most of the year at Stanford.
Being a lab rat scientist, doing neurobiology in the lab.
But in the summers,
most summers, I go and spend time in East Africa in the Serengeti studying wild baboons there.
Why? What is he working on? What's his reason to
Well,
do that?
Sapolsky is interested in studying stress, the effect that stress has on the body. And turns out baboons are a perfect source of data because they're always under stress. You know, the one thing we know about baboons and have known forever is that they fight.
Baboons
constantly.
Not just metaphorically, but literally have been the textbook example of a highly aggressive, male-dominated, hierarchical society. Because these animals hunt, because they live in these aggressive troops on the savannah, parentheses, just like we humans used to, and thus we evolved very similarly, they have a constant baseline level of aggression which inevitably spills over into their social lives.
Which is why he studies them. So, what Sapolsky does, basically, is he goes into the bush, and he watches.
Here are field notebooks, and there's a floor of them there and a whole shelf there.
His office is covered with these field notebooks, each one containing detailed notes of who groomed who.
And who's not getting along with who, and who's messing around with who in the bushes.
And he tells the following story of a particular moment in his baboon watching, which completely changed his life. Changed how he sees the world. It happened about 30 years ago. Sapolsky was a young guy just out of grad school, studying his first troop.
My first baboons.
A troop he really loved.
These were animals I was very connected with.
And in most ways, it was a pretty average group.
Yeah, your basic baboon troop. The females were highly affiliated with each other. They had a very stable ranking system. The males, meanwhile, highly aggressive, dumping on each other.
Because that's just what males do.
Right.
Or so he thought.
Okay, mid-'80s, big boom in tourism in Kenya, wonders for the economy, lots of new lodges, lots of lodge expansions, and there happened to be, the next territory over, a tourist lodge.
And this one particular lodge, he says, had gotten really big, really fast.
And during that time, the lodge greatly expanded their garbage dump.
Which means basically that they just dug a hole out behind the lodge.
And each day a tractor came out with the leftovers and dumped it there.
So what we're talking about here, if you can nasally imagine, is a big steaming pile of trash, half-eaten food, baking in the sun, smell wafting in the breeze for miles and miles and into the nostrils of baboons everywhere. So, it was not long before a troop of baboons, not Sapolsky's, but one nearby,
discovered the garbage and just started feeding on it. And here they are eating leftover desserts and chicken whatevers, and
find
all of
dump full of food must be to a baboon like wandering into heaven.
Manna in the wilderness.
Yeah.
So this troop almost immediately shifted their entire behavior to they just slept in the trees above the garbage dump, and instead of getting up at 6 in the morning to start foraging, they would waddle down around 2 minutes of 9, and the tractor would show up at 9 o'clock and dump the food, and they would have 20 minutes of sheer frenzy. And then they'd go back to sort of being couch potatoes.
And this is how it went for a while.
So they're over there living off of garbage, and somehow some of the males in my troop figure this out.
These males think, we got to get in on this. We've got to go over there and take their food.
What emerged was each morning a bunch of males would run a kilometer or so to the garbage dump and fight their way in to get some of the garbage.
So every morning there would be a showdown, basically.
Yeah, and they would come back with canine slashes and stuff like that.
But they'd also have drumsticks, cakes, hamburgers. And this ritual, says Sapolsky, went on for years.
And then a few years into it, I got word that there were a couple of baboons in this garbage dump troop that looked awful and something was wrong with them.
Some guys from the lodge had called him and said, hey, you better get down here and look at this. And when he got there, what he saw was horrible.
Animals with rotting hands, walking on their elbows.
Oy.
I mean, just really bad. So, trying to figure out what this is about, get veterinarians involved, and we finally figure out it's tuberculosis.
Turns out some infected meat had been thrown in the dump and then eaten by the baboons. And this was really bad news, because while tuberculosis in people is a really slow-moving disease,
TB kills non-human primates in weeks, and it's a nightmare of a disease for them.
In just a short time, the garbage dump troop was completely decimated. Not to mention that the tough guys in Sapolsky's troop, the ones that had gone to the dump every morning, they got it too. The same kind of rotting hands and...
They all die of it.
Oh, wow. That must have been really kind of tragic to witness.
This was not a good period for me. These were my animals. I had grown up with these guys.
But, while Sapolsky was heartbroken, now that half of the alpha males in his troop were dead, he did notice some strange things started to happen. changes.
How did it change?
Well, grooming spiked.
Grooming. So you and I sit on a branch and I take little fleas out of your fur.
Yes, well, usually when a female grooms a male, the males never reciprocate. But suddenly they were. Even weirder.
You saw adult males sitting in contact with each other and grooming each other.
Ooh.
You know how rare that is? Be like if suddenly in the middle of round 5 of a heavyweight bout, Mike Tyson just decided to stop boxing
and nuzzle his opponent.
Or comb Evander Holyfield's hair. It would be like that.
If you're a baboonologist, it would have been less shocking if these guys had wings or were photosynthetic or something. Up to then, I had seen like 30 seconds of male-male grooming in the course of 15 years.
But at the time, Sapolsky kind of wrote it off. This was just some freak event that wasn't going to last. So he actually stopped studying them.
Even after that big investment of time.
Yeah.
Scientifically, they were ruined by such a non-natural event, removing half the study subjects.
As a scientist, it became less interesting to you.
That was the rationale. It was just too painful to go and watch these guys. So I moved to the other end of the reserve, about 40 miles away, and started with a new troop there. And for 6 years, I would not go anywhere near this corner of the park because I just didn't want to be there.
Now, fast forward 6 years, and we come to the moment that really changed things for him, really flipped him into a different way of thinking. And it happened kind of by accident.
So about 6 years later, out there for the first time with who was soon destined to become my wife, and decided I wanted to kind of show her where I had grown up, what part of the park.
Ah, you wanted to go to the old haunt.
Yeah, basically. So went there, and the troop was there.
And they were acting pretty much the same as before. Lots of grooming, not so much fighting.
And isn't that nice? And they're still like this great remnant troop.
And he's sitting there with his wife, just pointing out all the different baboons. Oh, there's Tiva, and there's, I don't know, whoever. And then it hits him.
This epiphanal whatever.
Wait a second.
There was only one male left who'd been there at the time of the TB outbreak.
Dun, dun, dun.
I don't follow this. What? One male?
Stick with me for just 1 second and you will get it.
Okay.
The thing about male baboons, first thing you gotta understand, is around puberty, the males get a little antsy.
They get itchy, they're bored, and they just pick up and leave. So in a troop, any of the adult males grew up someplace else.
Which meant that these new guys that were coming into Sapolsky's troop were coming in from the outside, from the old world order.
The jerky, real dog-eat-dog world out there.
So you gotta figure these new males are coming in with old expectations that they're going to have to kick ass to be respected, which would mean that this whole kumbaya situation should evaporate the moment these guys show up. But it didn't. It stuck.
Oh my God. The new guys are learning we don't do stuff like that here.
And if the new guys are learning a new way, well, that means the old way, the violent way, isn't the only way.
And this floored me. It was one of those moments. It will be one of the 3 or 4 best science moments of my life. The key question was, how do these guys unlearn their entire childhood culture of aggression, blah, blah, and somehow learn we don't do stuff like that around here?
Well,
what?
Well, how do they unlearn something that was supposedly built in?
Well, he doesn't really know exactly.
Oh.
But here's Sapolsky's hunch. Here's his hunch, and this is really cool. It may have to do with that precarious moment when the new guy comes in.
Mm-hmm.
Now, normally what happens in this sort of status quo is that the new guy arrives and it's just a really bad experience for him.
It's awful. I mean, you look at them and you just identify with like freshman year at college or something. They're completely peripheral. Every male who's higher ranking dumps on them.
And even worse, this freshman baboon is completely ignored by the ladies.
And you just sit there and say, somebody groom him. My God, I went till sophomore year until somebody groom him. Come on.
Why don't they groom him?
Well, because if they did,
some adult male would have attacked them.
Oh. So the ladies hang back while he's out there biting and clawing and trying to scratch his way in. What you've got here is a cycle that has existed for a long, long time. But if you make one small change, just remove the alpha male, take him out of the equation, suddenly
the females are more relaxed and more likely to take a social gamble of reaching out to somebody new. The key thing is the females.
Sapolsky thinks that it's all about timing. If the females can get to the new guy early enough, everything is different.
It's remarkable. In your typical troop, it's 3 months on the average before the first female grooms you. In this troop, 6 days.
Get out. 6 days as compared to 3 months?
Yeah, and a world in which from day one, as an adolescent male, you're treated better, something about the aggressiveness melts away.
The thing, though, is, Jad, that before we get too carried away, we do have to ask the question just how permanent this change is, as nice as it is. So I explained this whole story that you've just told to a professor at Harvard named Richard Wrangham.
Yep, Professor Wrangham is here.
He's an evolutionary biologist, studies chimps particularly. So I asked him, well, okay, you've heard the story about the baboons. What do you think?
Yeah, no, it's a nice example of the potential for some change. Clearly, we should put boundaries on it. You know, lots of baboons have been studied across Africa, and this sort of example has never been found in a natural context. But
what do you mean? I think aren't these guys wild baboons that just happened upon a garbage dump?
Yeah, it's just not a very natural context to have humans provide food that leads to several males dying.
But that means that I could imagine going on a helicopter all over Africa, shooting all the alpha males, and then giving all the ladies a chance to create a different baboon culture. And what I guess I'm wondering is, do you think, in an absurd situation like that the baboonery might change its essential nature?
I don't think it'll change its essential nature. I can see that there can be a cultural influence that may last a little bit of time. But the larger influence, clearly, is the set of genes that produce a particular kind of brain. A baboon is basically a baboon until you get some kind of genetic change. And that is something that Sapolsky has not seen there.
So Professor Wrangham wants a genetic change to make sure that this is really real, permanent.
Yeah, but here's the thing. I don't know if this constitutes a genetic change, but it has been 20 years.
Really?
Yes, 20 years, and Sapolsky's original baboon troop is still operating in this peaceful mode, even though dozens of new males have come and gone at this point. And the idea that something that was thought to be so unchangeable could change, and change quickly, and then stay changed as a result of something so airy and undefinable as culture, well, that has caused Robert Sapolsky, dare I say it, to hope.
Absolutely, and it's not something that I do by nature.
You're not a hopeful guy by nature.
No, not at all.
In fact, this story got him so hopeful, he decided to send it to Foreign Affairs magazine, which is a magazine read by a lot of politicians.
Yeah, and they went for it.
And so we had to ask him after it was published.
Did anyone write you back?
No, basically not. I basically heard nothing from anyone.
Nothing from anyone?
Yes, big yawning silence. I'm sure George Bush and Cheney read it each evening and tremble at its implications. But no, basically, as far as I can tell, it was a huge waste of time for me to write it.
Well, we read it.
Yeah. Thanks. My mother didn't even.
RadioLab will continue in a moment.
Message 1.